This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And here's your host, Paul Dickerson.
Hi, I'm Paul Dickerson, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. First up, Bob Brook, a serial entrepreneur, talking about his new venture in enhanced oil recovery at Salamanca Energy. Next up, we speak with Duaine Priestley, international consultant, former U.S. government official, talking about energy opportunities in Australia, China, and Russia. All that right after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply, or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. We have with us today Bob Brook, CEO of Salamanca Energy. Bob, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us about Salamanca.
Well, it's a new startup company. It's the third oil and gas company that I've been involved in starting. The concept's very new. It's some enhanced oil recovery in Appalachia. We had started working on this in June last year, and we've probably formed the company in August, put land together. We plan to drill our first well in March this year. So
wow, that's fast.
It's an indication of how quickly these days things can come together, and it's really I guess, having been doing this for about 20 years now, that some of the technologies that allow us to build a startup company have changed so much in that time. We can build geologic databases and land databases with new software tools that just weren't available 20 years ago.
Just accelerating the entire process.
It accelerates the process. A small group of people don't even need to be in the same office now. They can be operating on the same data in various areas of the world and can develop the kind of concept of a company very rapidly.
Well, we're hearing more and more about how America finally is going to be producing more of its own fossil fuel, right? And you're a big part of that with the enhanced oil recovery. Can you help our viewers kind of understand the market opportunity for what you're doing?
Well, I think obviously this is a good time in our industry right now. We're enjoying a good time with oil prices where they are, and anyone who's been in this industry as long as I have knows that we've seen the other side of that. What I could really get excited about is the new blood that's coming into this industry. We've had a 20-year void, I think, of we've had layoffs and mergers have been more of the trend. While I've been working in Appalachia, I've had the opportunity to work with Marietta College in Ohio, is one of the oldest petroleum engineering schools in the country. And right now they have 300 students in their petroleum engineering group. They had like 30 10 years ago. And it's just really fun to see these young people coming into this industry with new ideas, new concepts. And with the shale players we see today, a whole new way of finding oil and gas. And so, with the oil production in this country actually increasing as we speak, which most of us never thought we'd see again.
Sure.
And new mines coming in and new challenges, it's a fantastic time for this industry.
Now, when you look at the enhanced oil recovery technologies and techniques, can you explain some of the differences in those techniques and maybe how you're different?
Well, every reservoir is different. I mean, this is something, we get to know. There's not one magic silver bullet that's going to work everywhere. Right. And, so you have a vast array of enhanced recovery methods. And they continue to improve. But whenever you look at a reservoir, you've got to analyze the complete array of science behind what you plan to do and determine what you think is the best method. And there's many people much smarter than me. Unfortunately, I think I have a few of them working on this project with me. That where you will look at a particular reservoir, what's happened in the past, how much oil is it produced. Particular reservoirs we've looked at were discovered in the 60s and they've been produced, for 40, 50 years. And yet there's still a lot of oil left in the ground, and there's ways to get it out. The question is it commercial?
Sure.
And so we're trying something in these reservoirs that has been done elsewhere, but has never been tried in this area. So are we right or wrong? You can ask me back next year, and I'll either be bragging about it or I'll be talking about something different.
Right. Now, you again, this is your third venture. I'd love to hear some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and also maybe a little bit about the companies that you led to bring you to today.
Right. Well, I've been very fortunate, I think, have been involved in my career with some outstanding technical people and also some really, really smart and patient money capital. And I think that's, those are two parts of the formula that are absolutely essential. The first company I was involved with was Output Exploration, which was a subsidiary of a company called Input Output. And we did a management buyout in 1999 when oil was actually $10 a barrel, and no one wanted to invest in our industry. I mean, it was the dark ages. And we were lucky enough to raise $15 million from primarily Princeton University endowment. And we grew the company over an 8-year period. We did acquisitions, we did field development, we did exploration, and we eventually sold the company for about $140 million. Wow. And, the lesson learned, I think the number one lesson is the patience. You've got to have sufficient funds to meet your objectives. You've got to have the excellent talent. Those go without saying. But it's the patience, because this is a cyclical industry, and no one can predict the timing of these things. Things are going to go down at some point. It may be tomorrow. I may have just said how great this is, and you've got to not only ride through those situations, but you've also got to take advantage of them.
Right.
So the successful companies are the ones that have the investment patience to see the project through. As long as you've got the right talent, you ultimately will succeed.
Well, and you're involved with a variety of companies. Did I see, is it Spatial Energy that you're in?
Yeah, I'm on the board of advisors of Spatial Energy, and they're just a great example of how technology is changing the way we do our business. What Spatial does is they provide satellite imagery and other remote sensing data and services to the oil and gas industry. And this data, we've had satellite data around for a long time, but the way it's being used now is completely different. It's used in every part of the oil and gas workflow. So an oil company might buy data right at the start of a project, a new satellite data, and they'll use it for initial planning, seismic operations, well site planning, drill planning, environmental health, safety. It becomes a baseline for the whole project. And what Spatial does is that they find the data the oil company needs, and then they host that data and allow everyone in the organization access to the data. It used to come in on disks and sit in someone's desk drawer, and then they'd go, so now there's one. And a good example, just quickly, is well site planning with the shale plays today. These are very large well pads, and there's a lot of them. And in the past, we'd have to go out and survey those things, design the well pad. It was done with a lot of field visits. Now nearly all that work can be done in the office. Using satellite imagery and digital elevation models, you can work out how much earth you've got to move, what the drainage patterns are, what the access points are, and saves the companies a vast amount of money.
Now, before I let you go, I need to ask you about some of these shale plays, and whether it's shale oil, shale gas. You're one of the few people that I know was in Marcellus very, very early. Can you give us your perspective of what's happening there?
I think the thing I find most interesting is how technical these plays are. 3-5 years ago, you heard people calling this a manufacturing process.
Right.
And I don't think any of us really thought it was, but I think that was an investment buzzword. And, these have become very technical plays. There's clearly sweet spots in every one of these plays, and each play has its own characteristics. So the companies that are really successful are the ones that have the integrated team of geoscience, engineering, land, finance, the whole aspect of it, but they're applying all of the science, geochemistry, into these opportunities. These are not manufacturing plays. In many ways, I think they're more technical than conventional plays.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming by. Congratulations on the new venture.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes our discussion with Bob Brook. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. My guest now, Duaine Priestley, head of Priestley International Consulting. Duaine, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Paul. Good to be here.
So tell us about this consulting company.
Well, it was a recent initiative in May of last year. After spending a great deal of time in the government, I just saw a lot of opportunities in Houston that were not being met. And as fortuity would have it, I was given the opportunity to represent the government of Queensland, Australia in Houston on what they're doing in the coal seam gas LNG sector, and things have sort of taken off since then.
Tell us a little bit about your representation and work there with Queensland.
Sure. Queensland is going through a resource boom right now. It's one of the largest, and Australia in general is one of the largest exporters of coal, and I think everyone's very familiar with that. But Queensland has some unique coal that produces coal seam gas, which they can then convert into LNG. So as we speak, there are 3 LNG plants being built north of Brisbane in a town called Gladstone, $50 billion worth of investment. One of the investors is ConocoPhillips. There's a 4th LNG plant planned with Shell Aero. So all told, they're expecting nearly $80 billion worth of investment to go into Queensland within the next 5 to 10 years.
And Queensland, of course, is a state of Australia.
Yes.
And it's near the Barrier Reef.
Yes, it's on the northeast corner. The Great Barrier Reef runs along the length of Queensland. It's an immense state, twice the size of Texas, but it's, as I said, resource rich. In addition to the LNG industry that's in its nascent stages, it has a long history in coal, of course, but there are 23 separate coal projects that are taking place in Queensland. To feed this energy giant, they're going to build 2 1,500 megawatt power plants within the next 3 years. And they recently had a Shell oil or Shell gas find in western Queensland, which is largely ignored because so much activity is taking place in eastern Queensland.
Incredible growth.
Yeah.
How is it that U.S. companies can take advantage of this opportunity and find some business?
Well, thank you. That's actually a really good question, and that's part of why the Queensland government approached me about representing them. As you may know, Queensland is a large state. It's twice the size of Texas, but it has a very small population of 4 million people. An outgrowth of that and a result of the energy industry being new, they don't have the skill sets. They don't have the population. They don't have the foundation. So there's a great deal of need for skilled labor, for higher education labor, petroleum geologists, nearly everything. One result of that lack of skills and knowledge base is that there's a great deal of wage inflation. So you might imagine you get paid well to work where there aren't many people.
So lots of work and high pay.
That's right, and beautiful weather.
Well, and true to your focus on international consulting, tell me a little bit about this. Was it the Houston-Dongyin Energy Leadership Alliance?
That's correct, Paul. The alliance was an outgrowth of a relationship that the city of Houston signed with the city of Dongyin, China. Dongyin is the for a comparison's sake, it is the energy equipment capital, manufacturing capital of China, and it lies about halfway between Beijing and Shanghai in the Bohai Bay. There are a lot of companies in Dongyin that were spun off by Sinopec and now are either privately held or publicly owned companies. And they are looking to the U.S. for partners, for joint ventures, for technology transfer. We had a very illuminating conversation the first time we met. The Chinese companies were very forthright in admitting that they spend a lot of time trying to develop their own technology only to go to market and still realize that they're 10 years behind. So the alliance was an attempt to try to bridge the gap between Donying and Houston because there are great deal of opportunities for Houston companies in Donying.
What are some of the opportunities for Houston companies?
Well, I can tell you Cameron has a presence in Donying. There are some other U.S. companies that are looking at putting facilities there because to help manufacture for the Chinese market and to help enter into some of the other markets that are nearby, like in Kazakhstan, where the Sinopec and some of the other Chinese companies are very active. And of course, on our side, the intent is to help the Chinese companies enter the Houston market, but to do it in a rational and sort of measured way. We've found that some of the first-to-market Chinese companies, when they came to Houston, made some very egregious mistakes. So we're trying to help them understand the process in the United States and how you do business in the West. So that's part of what my job is to help Houston companies identify those opportunities and then help the Chinese companies make a smooth transition into the U.S. and then help find partners, sort of a business speed dating, if you will.
Well, and it's an interesting development, right? Yeah. To now have Chinese companies coming to the U.S. market looking to expand and grow.
Yeah. There's a lot of interest in China and all of China to have a presence in the United States because I think they realize finally that in order to be considered a player, you have to have a presence in the United States. And of course, many of them are keen to get into what's going on in the Western Hemisphere. So they understand that Petrobras is attracting a lot of attention and they'd like to have a part of that as well. But they understand that if you're going to do business in the energy industry, you have to be in Houston. And they now understand that. It's just a matter of trying to help them understand and how to do it well.
So if you're a U.S. company, a U.S. energy company with a certain type of technology, when do they pick up the phone, call you, and say, plug me in?
There is a trade show in Donying in October, and they're trying to build that. It competes with the big CIPEE trade show that takes place in March of this year in Beijing, and that's sort of like the OTC for China.
Got it.
But there are lots of opportunities, coil tubing, any sort of the compression industries, the manufacturing. I will say that part of the challenge for the Chinese is it's not a market-based economy. When I was there a few years ago at the height of the global financial crisis, I was stunned at the amount of pipe that was being built, and they even admitted that they just kept building it because that's what their instructions were to. So they need to learn the market, and that's what they're gravitating towards now.
Well, we started in Australia. We worked our way to China. Let's go a little further north. I understand you're a board member of the Texas-Russia Chamber of Commerce?
Yes, we actually just changed the name because we have, to the U.S.-Russia Chamber of Commerce, what we found, Paul, was that the Chamber has been very active in Houston. It started in 2009. We have over 100 members right now, including Exxon and Shell and Fluor and all of the big companies. We've been very active in Houston. We're finding companies not only from Russia want to be members. We have the leading investment fund in Russia as a member. We have some of the biggest companies that are not the state-owned companies that are members. But it has grown very quickly, so we changed the name to the U.S.-Russia Chamber of Commerce to reflect a wider scale, and we're going to broaden our horizon in terms of membership.
Now, when it comes to Russia, how is it that you're advising U.S. companies to enter the market in what some can say can be a fairly unpredictable political environment?
The most important thing that's happened in the past 4 to 6 months with Russia is they agreed to accede to the World Trade Organization. And that is critical to not only U.S. and Houston companies, but it's critical to Russia because it's going to help make their system a little bit more transparent. It's going to provide U.S. companies with a dispute resolution process that is overwhelmingly in favor of the United States. It will afford U.S. companies national treatment, meaning that it will force the Russian government to treat foreign-owned companies the same way they treat Russian companies, which, as you and I know, it doesn't happen.
Right. So how is the Chamber and how are you as a member of the board trying to help U.S. energy companies better penetrate the Russian market?
Sure. We have a lot of delegations that come from Russia, and then we take individual companies to Russia. We help them meet with, for instance, the U.S. Embassy to get a snapshot of what the political and economic environment is like there, and then we match them up with some companies that we know are to be very reputable. We have some very good relationships with the largest trade and sort of chambers, industry chambers of commerce in Russia. So we match them up not only with businesses in Russia, but also introduce them to government officials to talk about some of the issues that would be of concern to those companies.
All right, so we've talked Australia, we've talked China, we've talked Russia. Natural gas, big issue here in America, and it's cheap.
Yes.
Yet it's not so cheap around the world. I'd love your perspective on the natural gas market in those areas and how they interplay.
Sure. That's a great question, Paul, because I think what we see is happening in the international spot market for natural gas is nearly $15 a BTU. And you have a country like Australia that is coming onto the market that has the potential to exceed the natural gas holdings of Qatar. The good thing for Australia is most of the offtake contracts are being taken up by the Koreans, China, Japan, particularly after what's the unfortunate earthquake in Fukushima. They're buying an inordinate amount of LNG from Australia. And then, of course, India. And then you have into that mix, you have Russia, which is a great producer of LNG, and they're having their own issues in Europe. So what I'm seeing is there's a great deal of interest in the international markets to see what's going to happen within the U.S. because, as you pointed out, gas is so inexpensive here. And there's a bit of concern overseas as well, what will happen if the United States starts to export gas. As you probably are familiar with the Goldman Sachs report that suggested that with the introduction of shale gas into the U.S. will rocket to, I think, the second largest energy producer in the world, which is a bit of a surprise. So there's a great deal of angst as well as energy, pardon the pun, in the international markets because you have Australia emerging. There's shale gas finds in China. Some suggest that China will be the leading shale gas producer by 2020, and others suggest it'll go up in smoke. You have a country like India that is a massive consumer of energy that is looking across the board. They just decided to shelve their shale gas exploration until 2013 because they understood that they need to get the right regulatory climate in place. And I should add in that regard, Australia and the government of Queensland is struggling with finding the right balance between pro-business versus pro-regulatory because they face some very peculiar characteristics in their gas market. Primarily the water table is so close to where the coal is, and it's an agriculture rich area in Queensland. So they face a lot of challenges, and they're struggling with finding that right balance between regulation and not regulating. And they look at the U.S. and they see what happens with some of the fracking, and they shriek in horror at what happens. And so there's a great deal of anxiety. There's a great deal of interest, curiosity what's going to happen with the U.S. market if they start to export.
Well, sure, and there's a lot of anxiety over here with the low prices.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think one of the wild cards in all of this will be what happens in China. I personally, having traveled there a great deal, I'm going to run counter course to everybody else. It's my position that China's in a bubble. When that bubble bursts, it's going to be pretty ugly. And if they stop buying on the spot market, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the international market. So there are lots of different variables at play there. Yeah. Who knows how it'll turn out? I wish I had a crystal ball because I would be making a lot more money than I'm now, but we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Well, thank you so much for coming in, and congratulations on all your success.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate the time.
And that wraps this episode of the Energy Makers Show, heard on the radio nationwide and seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com. I'm Paul Dickerson, and we'll see you next week.